Hi everyone and welcome to English for You. I'm Pat.
I'm Nikki.
And obviously we're kind of still in what is hopefully the last few months or maybe the last year of the worst part of
COVID-19.
And we've talked a lot about it at different times. How have you kind of changed your habits during this time?
I used to be a party girl.
Okay.
But during the pandemic, I kind of started to learn how to spend time with myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I started to read more and learn Spanish.
Bueno.
Exactly. What about you?
Yeah, not as much because of other life things happening with my life during the pandemic. Mostly it's been related to how work has changed. Mostly working from home, which has actually been quite nice most of the time. So it's more to do with that because with children, all my other habits just change anyway. So they change my habits, never mind COVID.
But you get to spend more time with your kids.
That's been the big thing. I can stay at home, I can look after them, I can help out my wife and do all of that sort of stuff. So that has been really good. And often just thinking about what we can do to make our lives better, even in hard times, doing that, winning that is most of the battle. And that's what we're going to talk about in today's article.
We're going to share a little story.
Exactly. It's about carrying your own weather. Not actually the sun or the rain. Let's see what we mean by reading through the article.
Reading. The art of carrying your own weather. With the COVID-19 pandemic, many people have been having a bad time. If you've been feeling down for whatever reason, here's a meaningful little story to make you feel better. Born in 1905, Viktor Frankl was an admired Jewish doctor from Austria. During World War II, the Nazis sent him to concentration camps, where he was abused. However, Frankl saw some interesting things there. Different prisoners responded differently to the same terrible situation. Some of them found meaning in their suffering. One day, the Nazis began to perform experiments on Frankl's body. This was a real low point, but then Frankl realized something. He had the ability to choose how he felt. Instead of deciding to feel miserable, Frankl imagined teaching his medical school students back in Austria. He was able to feel much better about his condition. The fact was that Frankl had decided to carry his own weather. He chose how to feel, rather than letting something he couldn't control dictate how he felt. So the moral is to never let things you have no control over create your mood. No matter what the weather is like, always bring your own sunshine.
So we start kind of with what we've just been talking about in our introduction. With the COVID-19 pandemic, many people have been having a bad time.
Exactly. So it's very inconvenient.
Yeah, and of course a lot of people got sick, a lot of people lost family members and friends, but even if you avoided that, there was still a lot of difficulties, inconveniences, staying at home, you can't have much of a life, and so on. And all of this is because of the pandemic. A pandemic is a situation in which a disease spreads very quickly and infects many people in many countries, and it lasts a long time. COVID is one. You think of the so-called Spanish flu at the end of the First World War. SARS, Ebola, Zika, all of these kind of were close to being disease pandemics.
那今天的课文呢，就是要介绍一个希望可以帮助到大家的小故事。首先，课文一开始呢，就引导我们到现今的状况。因为现在有 COVID-19 这个流行病的关系，所以很多人其实都过得不是很好。那 pandemic 是名词，指的就是一种流行病，一种在全世界大规模传染的疾病。For example, the COVID-19 here. Also, influenza, flu is also a kind of pandemic, or AIDS, 艾滋病。
Right. So the article says, if you've been feeling down for whatever reason, here's a meaningful little story to make you feel better. So maybe your kind of bad mood or troubles with life aren't COVID related. It could be anything. Stress from work, stress from school, difficult relationships, not knowing what you're going to do in the future. All of that can get you down. And here's a meaningful story that will help. But what does meaningful mean? Well, full of meaning. Whatever we're talking about, it has some importance. It has significance. It doesn't just entertain you. Some stories entertain you, but if it's meaningful, there's maybe a good lesson in there.
It's like, aha!
Yeah, there's something you can learn. It's greater than just, oh, it's a story, it's a bit of fun and it's done. No, this is meaningful. It's going to maybe affect you in a way that will improve things. For example, Tanya and I had a meaningful conversation in which we discussed our future and whether we might get married and have children. So not just a conversation about, oh, what do you want for dinner? What should we do this weekend? No, this is a meaningful conversation.
About the future.
Yeah, about us, about who we are and what we're going to do together. That's meaningful.
那如果你为此感到心情不好的话呢，你就不妨看一下这个有意义的小故事，说不定你会感同身受，而且觉得心情好一点。Meaningful 是形容词，意思是有意义的或者是重要的。那因为我们前面看到这个字 meaning 代表的就是意义，那后面呢加了一个 suffix full 就是充满的，所以呢就会变成是有意义的意思。那相反的，如果我们今天要说是没有意义的，就会把 full 改成 less L-E-S-S 变成 meaningless 也就是无意义的或者是没有重要性的。
Yeah, no meaning whatsoever. But this story does have meaning, and it's the story of a man, and this happened at the start of the previous century. The article says, born in 1905, Viktor Frankl was an admired Jewish doctor from Austria.
那在这边我们看到了一个分词构句的用法，也就是说有两个句子，它们有相同的主词。那为了要让这两个句子更精简，看起来没有那么多余，我们就会先找到两个相同的主词。那在这边呢，就会是 Viktor Frankl。那第一句呢，我们就把它删掉。那再来第一句，因为可能是主动的，但是如果是主动的话，我们就会把这个动词变成动名词加 ing。但是因为这边是被动，它是被生 was born， 所以呢，我们就会把它改成 pp born， 把这个东西留着。那最后，若是它两个句子有一个连接词，像是 because 或者是 and， 我们就会把这个连接词给省略。
Now, if you know your history, then you'll know that being a Jewish person in that part of Europe at that time was not really a lucky thing, sadly. And we see that in the article. During World War II, the Nazis sent him to concentration camps where he was abused. Concentration camps were these terrible prison camps where people, particularly Jews and foreigners and other people the Nazis didn't like, were sent to keep them there isolated, either to do hard work, but very often just to die.
So they didn't do anything wrong, just being Jewish.
Exactly.
那刚刚呢介绍的 Viktor Frankl， 他在二战期间被纳粹党员送到集中营去虐待。Concentration camp 指的就是集中营，也就是在二战的时候呢，希特勒所引导的纳粹德国，他们所建立的集中营，是以一种非常不人道的方式在囚禁所有他们不喜欢的人，像是犹太人，或者是政治犯，或者是一些其他特定的民族等等。
And in these camps, Viktor Frankl was abused. If you abuse someone, you make them suffer badly. This could be physical abuse. You could hurt them, torture them, beat them up. It could be mental abuse. You're calling them names. You're making them feel awful. And with abuse, it's done out of cruelty. You're not doing it for any kind of good reason at all, except that you like hurting others. So it's a terrible, terrible thing.
Abuse 是动词，意思就是虐待，也就是做一些让人感到不舒服，甚至是很痛苦的事情。So if it's physical abuse, then it probably involves hitting or violence. If the abuse is mental, then it's probably related to emotional blackmail or some other kinds of mental discomfort.
Exactly. So the article says, however, Viktor Frankl saw some interesting things there in these camps.
And the article says, Different prisoners responded differently to the same terrible situation. So the situation is being kept in there.
Yeah, being kept in these camps, working, being starved, often being tortured and abused. And different people responded differently. Some carried on, some gave up, some fought back. It could be anything. But we've got a word in here to look at, prisoner. The word prisoner is somebody in a prison. Sometimes we can use it for people in a jail, which is before the trial. But we can also use the word prisoner for anyone or anything. It can work for animals that are being held captive so they can't escape. Someone traps you somewhere, you are a prisoner. For example, we could say, some of the prisoners dug a tunnel under the wall to escape the prison.
It's like the most common way of escaping the prison.
In movies, I don't know how much that really works.
接着课文呢就继续说，虽然 Frankel 他被关到集中营，但是他却看到了一些有趣的事情，像是不同的囚犯，他会对于这件可怕的事情有不同的反应。Prisoner 是名词，这边代表的就是俘虏，也可以是犯人或者是囚犯。那除了 prisoner 之外，我们也可以用 convict，someone who has been found guilty of charge and sent to jail。Or an inmate, someone who is already in jail. 那例句就说，有些犯人在墙壁下面挖了一个地道来逃出监狱。
So Frankel saw that the prisoners responded differently to what was happening, and the article says some of them, the prisoners, found meaning in their suffering. Okay, so what is suffering? Suffering is any kind of painful, difficult experience. You could be experiencing suffering due to sickness. It could be you've hurt yourself, so it's a physical thing. It could be mental suffering when you feel really bad about something that's happened or a decision, or you're terribly depressed or anything like that. You're undergoing this really bad, terrible time. For example, the wounded soldiers cried out for doctors to come and end their suffering.
那这些不同的人，不同的俘虏，那他们在这些痛苦中呢，找到其他的意义。Suffering 是名词，指的就是痛苦或者是折磨，也就是一些负面的感受。那同样的，也可以是精神上的，或者是身体上的。例句就说，这些受伤的士兵们急迫的需要医生来终止他们的痛苦。The soldiers want the doctors to put an end to their misery.
Which could mean helping them, but it could also mean
to kill
them. Yes, that's why we use it different ways. But these people, these prisoners, they found meaning in their suffering. They kind of thought, this is happening for a reason, and I'm going to respond to it in a way that is meaningful for me. Not them, not anybody else. I'm going to respond in a way that helps me, maybe helps the others around me. And it's not just, oh, why is this happening? This is terrible. I'm in pain. No, I'm going to make something of it. And we see that Frankel started doing this himself. The article says, one day, the Nazis began to perform experiments on Frankel's body. Sadly, this is something else that happened in the camps. Doctors trying to learn things or try things out would experiment on people and the prisoners because they couldn't say no. And when we use the verb perform here, we don't mean like performing on stage. We mean to carry out something, to do a procedure, to do a set of actions. We could say perform an experiment. You do all the steps in like a science test. Perform a medical operation. So cut somebody open, operate on their heart. We could also use perform a magic trick, which is sort of both kinds of perform, but you have to do all the steps right. Or a doctor could perform a blood test. They put the needle, they take the blood out, and so on. Here's an example. The doctor performed an operation to fix the patient's heart.
Perform 是动词，在这边指的是执行或者是进行。那通常这个动作呢，指的是比较有难度的事情，或者是特别有功能的事情。For example, to perform an operation. 医生开刀这件事情呢，因为它不是容易的事情，所以呢就会用 perform， 或是在这边的 experiment， 或者是 perform a study and analysis， 这些比较学术的东西呢也会用 perform。
The article goes on to say this was a real low point. This was as bad as things were getting for Frankel. He's being experimented on. It's in a lot of pain. So this was a real low point, but then Frankel realized something.
He realized that, the article says, he had the ability to choose how he felt.
Right. Instead of kind of letting his body tell him, he used his mind. He can control his mind, even though he can't control his body and what people are doing to it. We see, instead of deciding to feel miserable, Frankel imagined teaching his medical school students back in Austria. He came up with a happy memory, a great experience from his past, and focused on that and kind of pushed the pain away. So there we use this phrase instead of, followed by VING. And this is a prepositional phrase, and it's used to say you do one thing and not another thing. Instead of doing A, you do B. You don't do A, you do B. Instead of making tea, I made some coffee.
接着课文呢就说到，因为当时纳粹开始在 Frankel 身上做实验了，那对他来说其实是一个很糟的状况，但是他发现说他其实是有能力可以去选择他要怎么感受这一切的，也就是说与其让自己感觉很痛苦，他决定要想象他在医学院教书的样子。Instead of doing something 指的就是我们没有做这件事情，取而代之的是我们做了另一件事情。
So he didn't want to be miserable. Miserable means very sad. If you're miserable, you think there's no hope. There's nothing that can make things better. My life is terrible. There's no way I can ever come out of this sadness. So we could say Cora was miserable for weeks after her boyfriend broke up with her.
Miserable 是形容词，指的就是悲惨的或者是痛苦的。If you feel miserable, that means you're probably extremely unhappy. You're probably cold or broke or lonely or in pain.
Exactly. So while this was probably true, he was in pain, Frankel was suffering, but he decided not to feel miserable. He thought about his teaching and he was happier. And we see he was able to feel much better about his condition.
The fact that Frankel had decided to carry his own weather.
Yeah, that's it. Now here we're using weather as it's a metaphor. We're not saying he's carrying around a little rain cloud or a little sunshine. In his head, he's letting in his own sunshine. He's pushing out the rain, the cold that could be happening in his head mentally. And he's going, no, I'm just going to concentrate on the sun.
He's controlling his own mood.
Yeah, he's kind of carrying his happiness. We see in the article, he chose how to feel rather than letting something he couldn't control dictate how he felt. So there are two meanings of the word dictate. One is just to read something and talk out loud while another person writes it down, what you're saying. But here, dictate is being used to mean to use your authority, to use one's power in order to make somebody do something, to order them to do something or order something to happen. It implies force, it implies control, it implies the person has no choice but to do what they're told. For example, the teacher dictates the class rules and her students must follow them or get punished. They don't get to make their own rules, they're told what to do.
所以 Frankel 做的事情呢，就是成为自己情绪的主人。他能够选择要怎么去感觉他现在的状况，而不是让这些他没有办法控制的事情来控制他的心情。Dictate 是动词，指的就是控制或者是影响，但它其实是比较偏向命令的，可能是有上层或者是高层下达指令的感觉。那像是独裁者，一个有完全掌控权的人，我们就会称之为 dictator。
So that's his story, and the article says, so the moral is to never let things you have no control over create your mood. So this story has a moral, that's why it's meaningful to use a word from earlier. A moral is an important lesson of a story or an experience, something that someone hears about this story or learns from something that happens as, aha, this is something to remember, this is something good to do, this is something to learn that will help me in the future. For example, The moral of this story is that you shouldn't judge a book by its cover.
那这个故事呢，它有一个寓意，就是告诉我们不要让那些我们不能控制的事情影响了我们的心情。Moral 是名词，在这边指的是寓意。那这个字呢，另外一个意思是道德教训。在这边课文的意思就是说，听完了这个故事之后，我们可能会有所启发，或者是因此学到了些什么，这就是寓意。
So another way to phrase this moral of this story, no matter what the weather is like, always bring your own sunshine. So always create your happy mood, always try and keep that inside you, and don't let the outside world affect or dictate what you feel. Okay, that brings us to the end of this article. We hope you've learned from it. Let's now go to today's For You Chat question.
For You Chat.
So today's For You Chat question is, what do you usually do when you're feeling sad?
I would probably put on some good music, something to make me feel a bit happier, or read something funny, something that or just something that kind of takes me away for a bit. So yeah, those are my usual things. Go to have a read of something, watch something maybe, watch a comedy program or an exciting movie, listen to some nice music and kind of get myself in a better mood. Or the very British thing, make a cup of tea. Yes. How about you?
If I have time, I also do that, to watch a movie or watch something. But if I don't have enough time to do whatever, I will play with my dog.
Okay, yeah. Animals help with that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's so cute.
So there are some things you can do if you feel sad. You can create your own weather by doing something that makes you happy, thinking happy thoughts. All right, that's all we have time for today. Thanks for watching with us. For English for You, I'm Pat.
I'm Nikki.
We'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Vocabulary Review. Meaningful. For many people, raising a child is a meaningful experience. Prisoner. The jail is meant to hold 1,000 prisoners, but its cells have 1,500 people living in them. Suffering. Although Joanne was upset her grandfather died from his illness, she was glad that his suffering had ended. Perform. Once everyone was together at the church, the priest began to perform the wedding. Miserable. Mary is miserable. She lost her job, and her boyfriend broke up with her on the same day. Moral. The moral of the movie is that you shouldn't lie to the people you love.
智慧小补帖
Pandemic. Concentration camp. Abuse. Dictate.
以上节目是由活用空中美语制作，活用空中美语杂志，请洽询全国各大书店。如欲索取试听教材，请来电02-2364-4000 02-2364-4000，或上网查询，网址是 www.english4u.net www.english4u.net